Welcome to DriverDTrains. Thanks for stopping by. I'm your host, Driver D. Joining us today is our conductor and brakeman, Scratchy-C. Recently, I completed a series of videos on how to assemble and configure a basic DCC-EX command station to run our trains. When I began work on this project in June 2023, I thought that I would be making one video about DCC-EX and it would take a couple of weeks to complete. Little did I know that the project would grow to include 6 videos and several shorts and take 7 months. In order to assist both new and returning viewers, I have compiled all the videos from the series into this one supercut so that you can have the complete set all together in one place. The resulting video is quite long. To assist with navigation through the various parts, I have included a table of contents at the beginning of the video, as well as individual chapter markers in the bottom left corner of the screen. Be sure to check this video's description for links to the original videos in the series, as well as the various websites and products I mention here. YouTube limits the length of the description, so the one here will not be as complete as the ones in the original videos. Use the links to the original videos to see additional information. Also, if you are enjoying the videos, please leave a comment and hit the like button. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. The videos included here merely provide an introduction to DCC-EX and show how to assemble a basic DCC-EX command station. This barely scratches the surface of what DCC-EX can do. I'll dive into additional features of DCC-EX, including turnout control and routes, controlling signals, automation, and more in future videos. But enough chit-chat. Our train is ready and the locomotive is idling on the track. Grab your things and let's get this hotshot freight rolling. Assemble a DCC-EX command station. Here is the work order for today's video. Part 1. Assembling a DCC-EX command station. DCC for the D-Saver. I designed the D-Saver so that I could run my DCC sound-equipped locomotives on a small switching layout. DCC, or Digital Command Control, is a National Model Railroad Association standard for electronically operating your locomotives and layout using a digital or computerized signal sent with the track power. Although I already have a DCC system buried somewhere in the back of a closet, for the D-Saver I wanted something more portable and the ability to use Wi-Fi throttles like my phone and tablet to control my locomotives. So I decided to assemble a DCC-EX command station. DCC-EX is an open-source DCC software package that runs on readily available Arduino-based microcontrollers, which are popular in the maker and tinkerer communities. Originally released in 2020, DCC-EX is an upgraded version of an older open-source program called DCC++, which was originally released in 2015 by a developer named Greg Berman. The DCC-EX developers took the base concept from DCC++, rewrote the software to make it faster and more expandable, and added many new features and enhancements. Originally called DCC++EX, short for DCC++ Extended, in August 2022, the developers shortened the name to DCC-EX to simplify things and reduce confusion. So if you see a reference to DCC++, that is the older 2015 program, but DCC++EX and DCC-EX are one and the same, and what I chose for the D-Saver. If you're interested in using DCC-EX on your model railroad, or in learning more about DCC-EX, be sure to visit their website. I'll include a link in this video's description. As I mentioned, DCC-EX runs on an Arduino-based microcontroller, or a compatible clone. An Arduino is a single-board microcontroller specifically designed for interacting with and controlling both digital and analog inputs and outputs, such as sensors and motors. The base Arduino board can be expanded with additional task-specific expansion boards called shields that stack on top of it. For the model railroader, the most important of these is the motor shield, which is designed to drive inductive loads such as, well, motors. The motor shield has two separate, independently controlled outputs, which means that we can use one Arduino with a motor shield to control both our main track, which can run multiple locomotives, as well as a separate programming track. Once I had settled on DCC-EX for the D-Saver and was confident that my track plan would work, I needed to order the necessary parts and assemble the Arduino-based command station. You can find a list of all the necessary parts and various options on the DCC-EX website. I'll also include the list and links to all the parts in this video's description. In this video, which is part 1 in a series, we'll start with the basic command station, the bare minimum you will need to run your trains. I'll walk you through everything you need and how to assemble it step by step. In the next video, part 2 in this series, I'll show you how to download and install the DCC-EX software that you will also need to run your trains. Then, after we test that to make sure everything is working, we'll circle back to add a Wi-Fi shield and an LCD display to the command station and upgrade the software. So without further ado, assembling a basic DCC-EX command station. Step 1. Get an Arduino Mega microcontroller or compatible clone. The first item we will need is the Arduino microcontroller or a compatible clone. The Arduino comes in a variety of physical sizes, which have different numbers of input and output ports, as well as different amounts of memory. I highly recommend that you start with the Mega Rev 3, which is currently the largest in physical size and has the most features and memory. It also supports all of DCC-EX's features, whereas the smaller boards don't. The other point I want to make is that you do not have to buy an Arduino branded board. A number of different manufacturers make Arduino-compatible clones. Elegoo is one of the better-known off-brands and endorsed by DCC-EX. I found the Elegoo Mega R3 available on Amazon in mid-2023 for $21. It comes with a short USB cable to connect to your computer for programming and power. But if you have a longer, old USB printer cable, you might want to use that instead for convenience. Note that you do not need to buy a separate power supply for the Arduino controller. It will get all the power it needs from the USB, either plugged into your computer or plugged into a USB wall adapter, like the kind you would use to charge your phone. If you're like me, you've got a drawer full of those. You can even run the Arduino from the USB port on a battery pack. If for some reason you really want to buy an AC-DC power adapter for the Arduino, you want one with 9 volts DC output and a 5.5mm by 2.1mm center positive barrel connector. This one is available on Amazon for $10. If you don't already have a spare USB cable and adapter, you might decide to try this instead. Just remember that you will still need to plug the Arduino into your computer once in a while to install and upgrade the DCC-EX software. Step 2. Get an Arduino motor shield or compatible clone. The second item you will need is an Arduino Rev 3 motor shield or a compatible clone. These are also known as L298 dual full bridge drivers, and you want one that is designed to plug into the Arduino Uno or Mega. Arduino motor shields typically have the smaller footprint of the Uno, but are designed to also fit perfectly and work with the Mega. I found this Kabuk off-brand one on Amazon for $17. You can say that forwards or backwards, although the board I received is actually branded as a Deke Robot, which is one of the motor boards recommended by DCC-EX. Thank you to whomever left the review in November of 2022 to let me know that it works perfectly with DCC-EX. There is one other option that you might consider. In May 2023, DCC-EX announced the release of their own open-source EX motor shield, custom designed for DCC-EX, with an initial batch for sale made by their Austrian manufacturing partner Semify. The EX motor shield offers a number of advantages and features not available elsewhere, including dual 5 amp outputs compared to less than 2 amps for a typical motor shield, hardware over current protection, and the ability to safely power the Arduino controller from the motor shield. The EX motor shield is a new product, and availability is currently somewhat limited. I ordered mine directly from the manufacturer in Austria. The price of the EX motor shield is also about double that of a generic board from Amazon. I paid $40 plus $23 for ground shipping from Austria, and the motor shield took several weeks to arrive. I'll share more details about my experiences with the EX motor shield in a future video. Step 3. Assemble the Arduino controller and motor shield. It's almost time to assemble the Arduino controller and motor shield. However, before we can do that, we need to make a slight modification to the motor shield so that we don't fry the controller's circuits. The standard Arduino motor shield is designed to send power to the controller board so that when you use a motor shield, you don't need 2 separate power supplies. However, the voltage and current we need to run model trains off the motor board could easily fry the controller, so we need to prevent that from happening. By the way, this assumes that we are using the standard Arduino-style motor shield or a comparable clone. The EX motor shield is specially designed for running model train layouts and provides a safe, controlled voltage and current to the Arduino controller, so we don't need to perform this step. However, for the standard Arduino-style motor shield, we need to make a small modification by cutting the small jumper trace in the middle of the voltage in pad on the back of the shield board. It's the one labeled VIN, and we can do this with a small X-Acto knife, or even a box cutter in a pinch, as I did here. Once we cut the trace, we need to check with a voltmeter to make sure that no current is flowing across the pad. Then it's simply a matter of carefully inserting the pins of the motor shield into the correct header sockets on the controller board. Check the labels on both boards to make sure you are lining up the pins correctly. Then gently start lining up the pins on one side from one end to the other, but don't press them in yet. Sight down the length of the board to make sure that none of the pins are out of alignment. Then do the same on the other side. The pins on my motor shield were bent during shipping, so I had to help them into the sockets with my fingers. Once all of the pins are lined up on both sides, gently start pressing them into the sockets. Go back and forth from side to side to make sure all the pins are firmly seated in the sockets. We have now assembled a basic DCC-EX command station. The only other thing we need to do is add power, and that's all there is to it. After that, everything else just adds additional features. Step 4. Wire up the track and get a power supply to run our trains. Now that we have assembled our basic DCC-EX command station, we need to hook it up to the track and provide power for the trains. The standard Arduino motor board has 3 pairs of screw terminals, one pair for power in, and two pairs, an A pair and a B pair, for two independently controlled motor outputs. By default, the A outputs will power the main track, while the B outputs will power our programming track. We will need 3 pairs of wires to power our DCC-EX command station and connect it to the main track and programming track. To make the connections easier, I recommend using some of these screw terminal barrel connectors, male and female, in the 5.5mm by 2.1mm size. Let's take a moment to talk about wire. I originally tried to use stranded speaker wire to hook up the command station to the D-Saver, but ran into a number of problems. The screw-type terminals on the Arduino motor shield and the barrel connectors don't work well with stranded wire, as the screw clamps spread the wire strands, which eventually causes them to come loose and even break. So I switched to solid core wire. This works much better with the screw terminals on the Arduino and the barrel connectors, although the wire is stiffer, making it a little harder to move the command station around. It's also important to be aware that the overall diameter of solid core wire and stranded wire of the same wire gauge is different. I originally started with 22 gauge stranded speaker wire, but when I switched to solid core, I used 18 gauge wire, which was the same overall diameter. When I add additional power drops to the D-Saver in the future, I will use 22 gauge solid core wire, which is much thinner than what I used here, but still more than enough for such a small layout. Once I had the wire sorted out, I prepared 3 connectors, one for the power supply and one each for the main and programming tracks. I made these all slightly different lengths so I could keep track of which was which, with male connectors for the track leads and a female connector for the power lead. I soldered 2 pairs of track feeder wires onto 2 sets of rail joiners and attached female barrel plugs at the other ends to plug into the male plugs I had installed on the leads coming from the motor shield. With this wiring in place, the DCC-EX command station was now hooked up to the layout and the programming track and ready for power to run the trains. To power our train layout, we will also need a power supply to plug into the motor shield. The exact nature of the power supply you will need for your layout depends on what scale you model. For HO scale, DCC-EX recommends a 12-volt, 5-amp power supply, such as this one I purchased from Amazon, which is currently $13. I actually paid $18 for it when I purchased it several months ago, so inflation must be cooling off. The 12-volt power supply works great for my relatively modern HO scale Athearn Genesis units. But doesn't work as well for some of my older locomotives. Ideally, for HO scale, I would prefer to have a 16 to 18 volt DC power supply running 4 to 5 amps. This is comparable to the MRC Prodigy I have in the closet. However, I had a hard time finding a suitable power supply in that voltage and amperage range during my initial searches. Then, some months later, I found this Black Star guitar amplifier. The 40-watt version of this amp uses a 16-volt, 3.5 amp power supply and takes a barrel plug almost the same size as the plug I had. I found several options on Amazon for a replacement power supply for this amp, including some that are rated at between 4 and 5 amps. I purchased this one for $17, although what I received looks different from this photo. It looks more like this one. In fact, it looks almost identical to the 12-volt one I bought. And it works great for some of my older locomotives, which run much better on 16 volts. Be sure to consider the needs of your own locomotives before choosing a power supply. It's better to be safe than sorry, so do your homework and consider trying a few options, starting first with a lower voltage power supply like I did. We now have all the hardware we need to run our trains, and it's time to download and install the DCC-EX software. Part 2. Installing and configuring DCC-EX. Now that we have assembled a basic DCC-EX command station, it's time to install the DCC-EX software, which is known as EX Command Station, but which I'll sometimes just call DCC-EX for simplicity. There are two different ways to install the DCC-EX software. The first way is to use the DCC-EX automated EX installer. Unfortunately, at the time that I first installed DCC-EX, the automated installer was only working reliably on Windows, and I use a Mac, and I was unable to get it to work in the brief time I tried it. In July 2023, DCC-EX announced that they had written a new installer that should work more reliably on other operating systems, such as Mac or Linux. However, I still ran into some issues trying to install it, although I eventually got it to work. But from the looks of it, and from reading the instructions, it doesn't look that much simpler to use than the alternative. Which brings us to the second way of installing the DCC-EX software, which is to use Arduino's native installer, which is known as an Integrated Development Environment, or IDE. The Arduino IDE is actually a major component of the Arduino's success, and I encourage you to try using it, even if you can use the automated EX installer. The Arduino IDE is easy to use and will allow you to customize your DCC-EX installation as time goes by. There are also a lot of other Arduino-based projects for model railroads besides DCC-EX, and if you become comfortable using the IDE now, you will be ready for your next Arduino project. So in this video, I will show you how to install DCC-EX using the Arduino IDE. Here are the steps we'll follow. First, we'll connect the Arduino DCC-EX command station to our computer with a USB cable. Then we'll download the DCC-EX software. After that, we'll download and install the Arduino IDE and test the connection between the command station and the IDE. Finally, we'll upload the DCC-EX software to the Arduino controller. When we're done, we'll use the EX Web Throttle app from our Google Chrome Internet web browser to test our command station and run some trains. So let's get started. Step 1. Connect the command station to our computer. Before we go on, let's make sure the basic DCC-EX command station we assembled in the last video is connected to our computer. To do this, we will plug the USB cable from the Arduino controller into one of our computer's USB ports. We don't need the track power hooked up just yet, but it's okay if it is. When we plug the Arduino into our computer, we should see some lights come on the controller board. On the Elegoo Mega, there is a green power LED on the right-hand side of the board, and a yellow light on the left side under the motor shield. If for some reason the yellow light on your controller board is not on, don't worry. The manufacturer could have it configured to be off by default. Later, when we upload software into the Arduino, additional yellow lights under the motor shield will flash on and off when the controller is transmitting or receiving information via the USB port. Step 2. Download DCC-EX, EX Command Station. Now that we've hooked up our command station to the computer, let's download and install DCC-EX. This is also very easy to do. One thing to note is that the DCC-EX software is not actually on the DCC-EX website. Rather, it is located in a GitHub repository. GitHub, which is now a subsidiary of Microsoft, is a cloud-based service for software development and is used by many open-source developers for distribution and version control. Scratchy-C has a bit of an infatuation with the GitHub mascot. I'll include a link to DCC-EX's GitHub page in this video's description, But for now, we'll navigate there from the DCC-EX website. First, let's go back to the DCC-EX website. There are a number of different places on the DCC-EX website to find links to the GitHub Downloads page. Currently, the most direct method is by using one of the buttons in the EX Command Station Releases box in the upper right-hand corner of the home page. We will be doing a manual installation of the production release, but it actually doesn't matter which button we press because they all go to the EX Command Station web page. Once on the EX Command Station page, we'll scroll until we see the selection called Manually Loading the Software. Then we look for the button that says Official Release Page. Press that and we will be taken to the DCC-EX Production Release Download page on GitHub. Now that we are on the GitHub Download page, we'll scroll down and find the link to download the most recent official version of DCC-EX. There are a few different versions of the download file using either tar or zip compression, but for the sake of simplicity, we are going to download the Command Station EX zip file. So we'll click on that link and the DCC-EX software will be downloaded to our computer in the Downloads folder. Step 3. Download the Arduino IDE. Since we'll be using the Arduino IDE to install DCC-EX, the first thing we need to do is download and install the IDE. This is a very simple process. First, we go to the home page of the Arduino website, which is a .cc address, not a .com. I'll include a link in this video's description. You can also get to the Arduino website from the DCC-EX website, but it requires clicking through a few different links. Once on the Arduino homepage, we select Software from the choices at the top and are taken to the Downloads page. Now we select our operating system from the Download Options box on the right, and we will be offered the opportunity to make a donation to help Arduino development if we like. Otherwise, we simply click on Just Download, and the Arduino IDE installer for our operating system will be downloaded to our computer in the Downloads folder. Now we find the installer in our Downloads folder and double-click to open it. On the Mac, this will open a disk image. We drag the icon for the Arduino IDE application onto the icon for the Applications folder. It will copy over, and we're all set. The Arduino IDE is now installed on our computer. On Windows, the installer you will download is a .exe file. Once the download is complete, you will launch the installer. The easiest way to do this is to select the file from the Downloads menu in your web browser. After you launch the installer, it will ask you where you want to install the Arduino IDE. Usually, this will be in your User folder. After the installation is complete, a pop-up will appear asking you to complete the Arduino IDE setup. Make sure that you have connected your Arduino command station to your computer with a USB cable. When you are ready to continue, select Finish. If you also check the box to Run Arduino IDE, it will automatically take you to our next step. We now have all the software we need for our DCC-EX command station. Step 4. Launch the Arduino IDE. Now let's launch the Arduino IDE for the first time and make sure it's connected to the command station. Find the Arduino IDE in your Applications folder, or wherever it may be, and launch the app. The computer may ask if you trust the app and are sure that you want to open it. After confirming that you do want to launch the Arduino IDE, it may take a few moments, but eventually a white canvas with a pulsing Arduino logo should appear in the middle of your screen. Then, after some more time, the main IDE window will appear, with a white pane at the top and a black one underneath. If you are using Windows and launched the IDE from the installer, you will see the same thing. You may also have to grant permission for the IDE to communicate on your networks. The white area is where all our program code will appear. In the world of Arduino programming, the bits of code we upload to the controller board are called sketches. When we first launch the IDE, it will open the basic Arduino sketch, which is just a placeholder for our future code. The black output area at the bottom of the window shows various messages from the IDE. Note that if you try to open the IDE before connecting the Arduino command station, you may not see the black output area. If that happens, don't worry. Just quit the IDE, connect the command station to your computer, and then open the IDE again. After we launch the IDE for the first time, it will begin downloading the various library packages and helper files it needs to function correctly. We'll see these listed in the black output area. Depending on our internet connection speed, this may take a minute or two to complete. Once the initial setup is done, we need to tell the IDE what controller board we want to upload our code to. In the upper left corner of the screen is a drop-down menu where we can select our Arduino controller board by indicating which USB port it is connected to. When we first launch the IDE, the menu will likely say Select Board. After the IDE scans our computer's connections, it may list the board for us. In this example, we are using an Arduino Mega for our command station, so we want to select the Mega that is connected to our USB port. We can also do this from the Tools menu in the menu bar. The exact way the name of the port is displayed on your computer will depend on the operating system you are using. Note that we do not want a Bluetooth connection. Our command station is connected via USB. If you see more than one USB port listed, you may have to resort to trial and error to find the correct one. Also, if you have more than one Arduino hooked up to your computer, you will want to make sure that you select the correct one. Once we select the Arduino Mega from the drop-down menu, we can test our connection from the IDE by uploading the basic Arduino sketch we found when we launched the IDE. First, let's compile the code and check that there are no errors by clicking on the small round button with the check mark in the upper left corner of the window. This will scan the code for errors and compile it so that we can send it to the controller board. Once this has completed, we should see a message at the bottom of the window that the IDE is done compiling. If you haven't selected a board yet from the drop-down menu, you will get an error message that you need to select a board first. Also, if for some reason you modified the code in the IDE window, you may get an error message if the changes would, in fact, cause an error. If you ever run into trouble, you can always start over with a new sketch by choosing New Sketch from the File menu. You just need to make sure you select the Arduino Mega controller board again from the drop-down menu. Once the IDE compiles our sketch and verifies that there are no errors, we can upload the code to the Arduino. To do that, we select the small round button with the right pointing arrow that is in the upper left corner of the window just next to the Compile button. This will recompile our sketch and upload the code to the Arduino. If we look carefully at the controller board, we should see a brief flashing yellow light indicating that the board is receiving the code. Because the basic Arduino sketch we are using for this test is so small, it only takes a fraction of a second to upload, so we may not see the light unless we are looking at it right as we start the upload process. In any case, after a few seconds, the IDE should display a message in the bottom right corner of the screen that it is done uploading. Again, if for some reason you haven't selected a board to upload to, or if your board is no longer connected to your computer, you will receive an error message. You'll need to reconnect the board and try again, and you may even need to close up and relaunch the IDE. We have now uploaded our first sketch to the Arduino. Now let's turn it into a DCC-EX command station. Step 5. Upload DCC-EX to the Arduino command station using the Arduino IDE. We're almost done installing DCC-EX. Now it's time to open the DCC-EX command station sketch in the Arduino IDE and then use the IDE to upload the code to the Arduino Mega controller board at the heart of our DCC-EX command station. First, let's find the zip file we downloaded earlier from the DCC-EX GitHub repository. We'll double-click that to extract all our files from the zip into a new Command Station EX folder. Inside this folder, we can find all the many parts of the DCC-EX command station software. At last count, there were 125 separate files in all. All of these are parts of the EX command station software and will be compiled together to send to the Arduino controller board for our DCC-EX command station. Now we need to load all of these files into the Arduino IDE. In the Command Station EX folder, we'll find the file called CommandStationEX.ino. INO are the last three letters in Arduino, and the .ino or .eno file is the tree trunk or the core of our sketch that the IDE uses as a starting point to identify all the other parts and branches of our code. Double-click on the CommandStationEX.ino file and it will open in the Arduino IDE and begin loading all of the other components of the command station software. This may take a minute or two as there is a lot of code. If for some reason double-clicking on the file doesn't work, you can also open it from within the IDE by choosing Open from the File menu and navigating to the Command Station EX folder, and then selecting the CommandStationEX.ino file. Once the DCC-EX command station is loaded into the IDE, we can see all of its parts. The first dozen or so components are listed across the top of the code window, but there are at least 100 more, and they won't all fit on the screen. But we can see a list of them in a drop-down menu by clicking on the three dots on the right-hand side near the top of the window. At this point, we don't need to know and won't get into what all of these do. That's a topic for another video. In the future, we will do some configuration of the code for the Wi-Fi shield and the LCD display, but for now, we don't actually need to do anything except upload the sketch to the Arduino controller. So we'll click the Upload button in the top left corner of the window. Remember, it's the small round button with the right pointing arrow in it, and the IDE will compile and upload our sketch into the Arduino. This time, when we look at the yellow lights on the controller board under the motor shield, we'll see both of the yellow transmit and receive lights flashing rapidly as the IDE and the Arduino engage in conversation. After about half a minute, the yellow lights will stop flashing, and the IDE will let us know that the upload is complete. We have now installed DCC-EX on our command station. It's time to test it and run some trains. Step 6. Test our command station with EX Web Throttle. It's now time to test what we've done and then run some trains. We will do this using the online EX Web Throttle app in the Google Chrome web browser. Unfortunately, the EX Web Throttle app will not run in Safari, Firefox, or Internet Explorer, so you will need to use a Chrome-based browser. According to DCC-EX, Opera and Edge should both work, but you will probably just want to use Google Chrome. If you don't already have Chrome, download it from the Google website. Once we have our Chrome browser open, we go back to the DCC-EX website and click on the EX Web Throttle link in the menu on the left. Then we'll scroll down to the page where it says, Try it now, run from the cloud, and click on the Try it now button. This will take us to the EX Web Throttle page and open up the EX Web Throttle in our browser window. As always, I'll include a direct link to the EX Web Throttle app in this video's description. Just a brief aside, you'll notice that the EX Web Throttle app still uses the DCC++EX branding from prior to 2022 that I discussed in my last video. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Now let's check the connection to our DCC-EX command station. Click on the Connect DCC++EX button in the upper right-hand corner of the window, and a pop-up window will appear on the left asking us to select the USB communications port for our command station. We'll want to select the same port that we selected when we used the IDE to install DCC-EX. Once we select the correct USB port, EX Web Throttle will connect to the command station and start sending and receiving information. Make sure the slider button for the debug console in the bottom left corner of the throttle is turned on. The yellow box below the throttle is the debug console, and in it we'll see all the responses received from the command station scrolling past as it identifies itself. Eventually, near the bottom of the list, we should see a line identifying the version of DCC-EX we installed and the type of controller and motor shield we are using. In this case, a Mega with the standard motor shield. The last thing we will check is the control for power to the track. We need to make sure that the power supply we selected for the track is plugged into the motor shield. You may recall from my last video that this was the shortest pair of wires with the female barrel connector that I attached to the motor shield's screw terminals. Remember, do not plug your track power into the Arduino Mega controller by mistake, or you may fry the board. Now we can click on the power slider button on the EX Web Throttle. We will see a confirmation in the yellow console window, and on the command station itself, we should see the 4 red lights on the motor shield next to the screw terminals light up, letting us know that power is flowing for both the main and the programming tracks. Click the power button on and off a few times to see the 4 red LED indicator lights go on and off in unison. Step 7. Let's run some trains. And now, at last, we are ready to run some trains. First, let's get a short section of track and hook it up with a pair of feeder wires with a female barrel connector on the end, like we made in the last video. We'll plug this into the lead from the command station for the programming track that we also made in the last video. Next, we'll get one of our DCC locomotives and place it on the track. Let's try this Santa Fe Jeep Bluebonnet. Let's make sure the power is on. Once we have our locomotive on the track, we can confirm its DCC address. There is no button on the EX Web Throttle for this, but we can do it manually by typing an uppercase, capital letter, R in the command line of the debug console, and then reading the result that comes back from the locomotive. In this case, the locomotive has confirmed that its DCC address is set to 3611, which is the road number on the locomotive. Having confirmed that, let's unplug our test track from the lead for the programming track and plug it into the lead for the main track. Now, in the locomotive ID window, we'll type in the locomotive address that we just confirmed, 3611, and hit return, or click on the little button with the arrow, and we will have configured our throttle for the locomotive. Let's make sure the power is on and try and honk the horn. Now let's turn on the lights and fire up the prime mover. Notch up the throttle, release the brakes, and we're ready to roll.
Dispatcher to the work extra. Let's copy a new warrant. Over.
Part 3. Adding Wi-Fi to DCC-EX. Now that we have assembled a basic DCC-EX command station and installed the DCC-EX software, let's add a Wi-Fi shield to the command station so we can use Wi-Fi throttles to control our locomotives. Here are the stops for today's manifest. First, we'll purchase a compatible Wi-Fi shield and some jumper cables. Then we'll mount the Wi-Fi shield on the Arduino motor shield and connect it with jumper cables to the Arduino. After that, we'll download and install the YThrottle app on our phone or tablet. We'll use the EX Web Throttle app in Google Chrome to confirm the Wi-Fi shield's settings so we can connect our phone or tablet to the DCC-EX command station and set up the YThrottle app and run some trains. The main line is clear, so let's get going. Step 1. Purchase the Wi-Fi shield and jumper wires. Now that we're ready to add Wi-Fi to our DCC-EX command station, we need to order the necessary parts. There are 2 items we'll need: a Wi-Fi shield for the Arduino and some breadboard jumper wires. I'll include links to these items in this video's description. Before we go on, there is one item I want to note about Wi-Fi shields and DCC-EX. Currently, in 2023, DCC-EX is fully compatible only with Wi-Fi shields running an older version of the Wi-Fi chip firmware from 2020. Unfortunately, this older firmware is no longer being used on new Wi-Fi shields in 2023. The newer version still works with DCC-EX, but in some cases your throttle might not connect and you will have to reboot the command station. It is possible that DCC-EX may be able to address this compatibility issues with newer firmware in a future update. It is also possible to downgrade the firmware on the Wi-Fi chip to the older version. However, that is a bit more detailed task and one that I'll cover in another video. Now, let's order some parts. For some reason, Wi-Fi shields for the Arduino don't seem to be that common, at least not on Amazon. So I recommend you go with DCC-EX's recommendation and purchase a MakerFab's Wi-Fi shield, which is based on a popular Wi-Fi chip referred to as the ESP8266, made by a company called Espressif. You can order the MakerFab's Wi-Fi shield directly from MakerFab's, and even though it has to ship internationally to the United States, the postage is minimal. I paid about $9 for the Wi-Fi shield and $6 for registered airmail postage in early 2023, and the package arrived in about a week. I'll include a link to the MakerFab's website in this video's description. In addition to the Wi-Fi shield, you will also need some breadboard jumper wires with male and female ends in different configurations. You can find these on Amazon in various links. The 20 centimeter or 7.8 inch ones work well. I recommend you purchase a variety pack like these shown here. You'll only need 2 male to female wires for the Wi-Fi shield, but you will need some female to female ones for the LCD display we'll discuss in the next video. Again, I'll include a link in the description. Those are all the parts we'll need for now. Step 2. Mount the Wi-Fi shield on the Arduino motor shield. Now let's attach the Wi-Fi shield to the Arduino command station. The Wi-Fi shield sits on top of the motor shield, and we attach it the exact same way we attached the motor shield to the Arduino. First, before we start, make sure you unplug the USB cable and all the power leads from the Arduino and motor shield. Now, get the Wi-Fi shield and look at the top of the board to identify all the pin names along the edges where the header sockets are located. You will want to make sure that these line up with the same pins on the motor shield. As when we did this before, line up the pins and set them gently in the sockets on top of the motor shield. Sight down the board on both sides to make sure everything is lined up. Then gently press the pins into the sockets a little at a time, going back and forth on each side to make sure the board is going down level and evenly on both sides. Check the pin names again to make sure everything is lined up properly. Then press the pins firmly all the way into the sockets. The Wi-Fi shield is now installed. Now look at the top of the Wi-Fi shield and find the 8 banks or groups of 3 pins in banks numbered from 0 to 7. The pins in the top and bottom rows are the data transmit and receive pins for the Espressif 8266 Wi-Fi chip at the heart of the Wi-Fi shield. Look at these pins and you should see a pair of black plastic jumpers straddling a couple of these pins, connecting them to the middle row. The middle row of pins connects through the header sockets to some of the digital circuits in the Arduino that we will not be using for the Wi-Fi shield. So we need to remove the 2 jumpers. You should be able to remove them easily with your fingers or a pair of tweezers. Just lift them straight up off the pins. You could throw them away, but I suggest hanging them off to the side of a couple of the pins, as I've done here, in case we need them again in the future. Just make sure only one side of each jumper is on a pin, and they'll be harmless. Now we need to connect a pair of jumper wires from the transmit and receive pins on the Wi-Fi shield to the transmit and receive pin sockets we will be using on the Arduino. These are pin sockets number 18 transmit and 19 receive on the Arduino Mega. We will need 2 jumper wires with female socket connectors on one end to connect to the pins on the Wi-Fi shield, and male pin connectors on the other end to connect to the sockets on the Arduino. If you bought a package of wires similar to the ones I suggested, find the ribbon cable with the male connectors on one end and the female connector on the other. Carefully peel a pair of wires off the ribbon cable. Take the male ends of the wires and carefully insert the pins into sockets 18 and 19 on the Arduino. Make sure the pins are seated all the way in the sockets. Make a note of which color wire is in the number 18 transmit socket and which is in the 19 receive socket. In this example, we have a brown wire in number 18 and a red wire in number 19. We will swap these on the Wi-Fi shield so that the data transmitted from the Wi-Fi shield is received by the Arduino, and the commands transmitted by the Arduino are received by the Wi-Fi shield. So take the female end of the wire you placed in the number 19 receive socket on the Arduino, in this example, the red wire, and place that wire's female socket on one of the transmit pins on the Wi-Fi shield. The transmit pins are in the row closest to the header socket on the edge of the board, and they are all connected together, so it doesn't matter which one you use, but I chose the pin in bank 0 for convenience. Now take the wire you placed in the number 18 transmit socket on the Arduino, in this case the brown wire, and place that wire's female socket on one of the receive pins on the Wi-Fi shield. Again, I chose the bank 0 pin. After you connect the wires, take one more look to make sure that the wire from the number 18 transmit socket on the Arduino is connected to one of the receive pins on the Wi-Fi shield, and the wire from the number 19 receive socket is connected to one of the transmit pins. After you've confirmed that everything is connected correctly, You can tuck any extra wire under the motor shield, as shown here, to keep everything tidy. Now, when you plug your USB cable into the Arduino, you should see a blue LED flash next to the Espressif Wi-Fi chip on the Wi-Fi shield. We are done with our hardware setup. Now let's work on the software. Step 3. Download the Y-Throttle app on our phone or tablet. Before we do anything with the DCC-EX software on our command station, let's download the throttle app we'll use to control our trains. That way, we won't have to do it later. For this demonstration, I will use the Y-Throttle app, which is available on the Apple iOS App Store for the iPhone and iPad. If you have an Android phone or tablet, you will want to use the Engine Driver app. Unfortunately, I won't be able to show you Engine Driver in this video. The Y-Throttle app is available from the Apple iOS App Store. There are two versions, the full version, which costs $10, and a free light version. For now, we'll just start with the free light version. You can upgrade to the full version later, after you've had a chance to try it out. Go ahead and download the app, but don't open it just yet. Step 4. Read the settings from the Wi-Fi shield. There are two different ways we can access the command station with our throttles using the Wi-Fi shield, depending on how we configure DCC-EX. The most basic and default method is to connect our throttle directly to the command station by selecting it in the Wi-Fi menu of our phone or tablet using the DCC-EX default password. This is called Access Point Mode, or AP mode for short. The other method is to instruct the Wi-Fi shield to connect to our local home network using our own home Wi-Fi name and password. Then we can access the command station anytime we are connected to our home network. This is called Station Mode. We will start by connecting our phone or tablet directly to the DCC-EX command station in the default Access Point mode, and then run some trains to test it out. So let's get started. Connecting in Access Point mode. First, let's confirm the Wi-Fi shield is working properly and obtain its address and password using the EX Web Throttle app we used in the last video. Remember, we need to use Google Chrome for the EX Web Throttle app. Plug your DCC-EX command station into your computer using the USB cable and wait a few moments for the command station to boot. Also, plug in all the leads for the track power. Then open the EX Web Throttle app in Google Chrome. I'll include a link in this video's description in case you've misplaced it. We need to make sure that the slider for the debug console is turned on. Then we press the Connect DCC++EX button in the upper right corner of the throttle. Select the USB port that our command station is connected to and click Connect. The EX Web Throttle app will connect to the command station, and we will see a transcript of the information being sent to and received from DCC-EX as the command station boots. There will be some brief pauses, but eventually we will see a couple of lines near the bottom of the console window that say LCD 3 ready and LCD 2 power off. Note that by default, DCC-EX will report this information for the LCD display even if you don't have an LCD display connected to your command station. We now need to copy down some of this information. Let's scroll up a little bit in the console window. You can do this using the scroll bar on the right side of the window, the arrow keys on your keyboard, or the scroll wheel on your mouse if you have one. If we scroll up about 5 or 6 lines from the bottom, the exact number will vary. We should see a line that says LCD 5 port equals 2560. This could be split across more than one line of text in the window. This is the address of the port that our throttle will use to talk to DCC-EX once we connect our throttle to the command station. It will almost certainly be 2560. Jot down the number just to be sure. Next, we scroll up about 3 more lines until we see a line that says LCD4, which will most likely be followed by the numbers 192.168.4.1. This 4-part number is known as an Internet Protocol, or IP address. IP addresses are used by devices that connect to the Internet, as well as most devices on private networks, such as the Wi-Fi shield on our DCC-EX command station. Again, write down the numbers, as we will need to enter them in our throttle app later. Now let's clear the console log using the button on the right. Then, in the console's command line box, we will type the following command, all in capital letters, plus CWSAP question mark. Then press return or enter, or hit the send button. This command tells the Wi-Fi chip to send its access point network identification and password. These are created by DCC-EX when the command station boots. The default value for the DCC-EX network ID in access point mode is DCC-EX _ followed by 6 letters or numbers. And the default password is pass _ followed by the same 6 letters or numbers, where the last 6 characters are from the Wi-Fi shield's unique hardware address. Note that the words DCC-EX and PASS are all in uppercase, while the 6 characters at the end are a combination of lowercase letters and numbers. Again, let's jot these down. If for some reason you have any trouble finding these items, press the Disconnect DCC++EX button, clear the log, then reconnect and try again. We now have the information we need to connect our Y-Throttle app to our DCC-EX command station and run some trains. Step 5. Connect the Y-Throttle app to DCC-EX. Now let's connect our Y-Throttle app to DCC-EX. First, we need to connect our phone or tablet's Wi-Fi to the command station Wi-Fi, which, as you may recall, is running in the default access point mode. Open the Wi-Fi settings menu in your phone or tablet and look for and select the network with the ID you copied earlier, called DCC-EX _ followed by the 6 letters or numbers you saw earlier. Then enter the password you copied down. Remember, it is uppercase PASS _ followed by the same 6 letters or numbers. Remember, the last 6 characters of your access point network ID and password will be different from the ones shown here. Your phone or tablet should now be connected to the DCC-EX Wi-Fi. Since you are no longer connected to your regular home network, you may get a message that you cannot connect to the internet over the Wi-Fi connection. This is normal and you can ignore it, but make sure your phone or tablet does not disconnect you from DCC-EX as a result. Check your phone or tablet's Wi-Fi settings if you're unsure. Before we launch our throttle app, let's get one of our DCC locomotives and place it on the main track. And because the free light version of the Y-Throttle app does not include a switch for track power, we need to turn on the track power using the slider in the EX Web Throttle app in Google Chrome. We'll address this limitation later. Now that's done, we can finally open the throttle app we downloaded earlier. Again, I will be using the Y-Throttle Lite iOS app for this demonstration. After we launch the Y-Throttle app, we will need to manually enter the IP address and port number for the DCC-EX Wi-Fi server that we copied down earlier. If the app does not automatically open with the Select Server screen, press the Settings button in the bottom right corner of the window, then the Server Configuration button. then whatever blue text is listed under Current Server. Now on the Select Server screen, click Configure. Then enter the 4-part IP address in the 4 boxes at the top and the port number in the box next to the word port below. Then press Connect. If successful, we should see a message that we are connected, although in some cases this may not appear. Now we'll click the Address button at the bottom of the screen, not the one in the menu at the top. This will let us set the DCC address for our locomotive. Select Keypad near the top if it is not already highlighted, and then type in the DCC address for your locomotive using the number pad. The DCC address for this Southern Pacific GP40 is its road number, 7623. After you've entered the DCC address for your locomotive, the Set button in the upper right corner of the screen should light up. Click Set, and the indicator in the upper left corner of the screen should change from a red Not Set to green, showing the DCC address you just entered. If for some reason the Set button does not light up after you enter the DCC address, go back to your phone or tablet's Wi-Fi menu and make sure that it is still connected to the DCC-EX command station and hasn't reverted to your regular home Wi-Fi network. Let's also double check again to make sure that the track power is on. Now, in the Y-Throttle app, we select the Throttle button at the bottom left corner of the window. Try turning on the headlight. If your locomotive has sound, try pressing F1 for the bell, or F2 or F3 to honk the horn. When we are ready, advance the throttle and our locomotive will roll out. All aboard! Step 6. Run some trains. We are now using our phone or tablet as a Wi-Fi throttle to control our trains using DCC-EX. Let's see what else we can do. If we like, we can change the layout of the throttle by clicking on the Settings button at the bottom and then selecting Throttle. On the D-Saver, I like to use the yard-style throttle with directional arrows instead of forward or reverse. You can also change whether the throttle speed slider is on the left or the right. There is also a dual throttle setup available for controlling 2 locomotives in the full version of the Y-Throttle app. If the throttle ever seems to get stuck, won't connect to the command station, or your locomotives don't act the way they should, my favorite example is when the horn sounds and won't stop, unplug the USB from your command station and close the throttle app or force quit if necessary. Then reboot the command station, turn on the track power, and reconnect the throttle. Now let's run some trains. Part 4. Configuring DCC-EX Wi-Fi. Now that we've added a Wi-Fi shield to our DCC-EX command station, downloaded the Y-Throttle app, and used the command station's Wi-Fi in access point mode to run our trains, let's learn how to configure DCC-EX to connect the Wi-Fi to our home network in station mode. While we're at it, we'll create a basic DCC-EX automation to turn on our track power when the command station boots. Here is our work order for today. First, we'll connect DCC-EX to our home Wi-Fi network in station mode. Then we'll connect the Y-Throttle app to DCC-EX on our home network and try running some trains. After that, we'll learn how to use access point mode after the command station has been configured for station mode, and how to restore the Wi-Fi chip to the default access point mode settings. Then we'll consider the pros and cons of access point and station mode to help you decide which to choose. Finally, switching tracks, we'll take a look at the DCC-EX automation file and create a simple automation to turn on the track power when the command station boots. We've got to keep the customers happy, so release the brakes and let's get rolling. Configuring DCC-EX Wi-Fi. Step 1. Connect DCC-EX to our home Wi-Fi network in station mode. Thus far, we have been using the Wi-Fi on our DCC-EX command station only in access point mode by connecting our phone or tablet's Wi-Fi directly to the command station. Now let's look at how to connect the command station to our home Wi-Fi network in station mode instead. We'll do this by creating a configuration file in the Arduino IDE and upload it to the DCC-EX command station. We'll create the configuration file by copying the example that DCC-EX provided for us and making some changes to it so that the command station will connect to our home Wi-Fi network. So let's locate and launch the Arduino IDE. When you launch the Arduino IDE, it will open the last sketch you worked on. Presumably, this will be the DCC-EX command station. If not, find the DCC-EX command station sketch we downloaded in an earlier video and open the commandstation.ex.ini file. This will load DCC-EX into the IDE. Just remember, it may take a minute or two for the IDE to load all the code. What we are going to do next is create a configuration file by copying the example that DCC-EX provided for us. Find the tab bar near the top of the IDE window where we see a list of some of the files that make up the DCC-EX software package. The ones we see here are just a few of the 100 separate sketch files that make up DCC-EX. To see the rest, we need to find the button with the 3 dots near the upper right corner of the code window. Press this button and we will see a menu with a list of all the individual parts that make up the DCC-EX command station package. Scroll down to near the bottom of the list and find the file called config.example.h. Note that the IDE alphabetizes capital letters before lowercase letters, so the config.example file is near the bottom. Select the config.example.h file in the menu and it will take us to the default DCC-EX configuration file. Let's take a brief look around. If we scroll through the file, we will see that it includes definitions for a number of DCC-EX features. Look for the lines with the green and orange letters that start with #define. The most important of these is the definition for what kind of motor shield we are using. But the definitions that we are most interested in today are the ones for the Wi-Fi network, and the two that we will want to configure are the Wi-Fi network name and the Wi-Fi password. We will do this in a new copy of the file called config.h. Now we could easily quit the IDE, navigate to the folder where we put all the DCC-EX files, make a copy of the config.example.h file, rename it to config.h, and relaunch the IDE. But we can do all that faster in the IDE itself. We'll go back to the 3 dots menu and select New Tab at the very top. We'll name this new tab config.h, all in lowercase letters. Then we'll use the menu to go back to the config example file and use Control or Command A to select all the text, and then Control or Command C to copy it. Then we'll go back to our new config.h tab, either by clicking on the tab itself if we can see it, or by using the dots menu. Now click in the empty tab and use Control or Command V to paste the text. We can scroll through the text to confirm that it is all there. We have now made our own personal copy of the DCC-EX configuration file. Now, in our own personal config.h tab, we can enter the details of our home Wi-Fi network. There are only two definitions we need to change: the network name and the password. The network name is technically called a station ID, so we are going to look for the line in the code that says #define Wi-Fi SSID. In the quotes where it says your network name, we are going to type the name of our Wi-Fi network. Keep the quotes that are already there, but make sure your Wi-Fi network doesn't have a name that includes the double quote symbol. Next, we're going to find the line that says #define Wi-Fi password and replace the your network password text with our Wi-Fi password. Again, keep the quotes that are already there, but make sure your password doesn't include any other double quote symbols. We have now modified our personal configuration file for our home Wi-Fi network. Let's upload the modified sketch to the Arduino by clicking on the Upload button. Remember, this is the round button with an arrow in it in the upper left-hand corner of the IDE window. The IDE will compile and upload our code along with our new configuration file, and the command station will reboot. Then quit the IDE. Step 2. Connect the YThrottle app to DCC-EX on our home Wi-Fi network. The Wi-Fi chip in the command station sometimes needs the power to cycle to update its settings, so we'll unplug the USB cable from the Arduino and then plug it back in. Now we'll go back to the EX WebThrottle app in Google Chrome. Make sure the debug console is on and then press the Connect DCC++EX button. Select the USB port that our command station is connected to. As before, the debug console will provide a transcript of all the commands sent to and received from DCC-EX. Now, however, when we scroll up through the text in the console window, the line that says LCD4 should now show a new IP address, probably 192.168.1.170 or something close. We can also get this IP address by typing the command +CIFSR into the debug console command line and pressing the Send button or hitting Return or Enter. Once you find the numbers, write them down since we will need them for the next step. Before we move on, let's also make sure the track power is on. It's time to reconnect our phone or tablet to our home Wi-Fi network. Then we'll open the YThrottle app and go to the settings screen. We'll again select Server Configuration and then click on the name of the current server if needed. In this case, it's DCC-EX. We'll then click on Configure and enter the IP numbers we just saw in the 4 boxes. The port number should still be 2560, the same as before, since we did not change that in the config.h file. Hit the Connect button and the YThrottle app should connect to the server. Click on the Address button at the bottom of the screen. Select the number for the locomotive we ran the last time, or else press the keypad button to enter in a new locomotive's DCC address, and then press Set. The red Not Set button in the top left corner should again turn green with our locomotive's address in it. We are now connected to DCC-EX in station mode, and we're ready to run some trains. Press the throttle button at the bottom left corner of the screen, and we are ready to fire up the prime mover. Light the lights, sound the horn, and prepare to roll out. Now, whenever the DCC-EX command station boots, if it finds our home Wi-Fi network, it will automatically connect to it in station mode. We can open the Y-Throttle app on our phone or tablet, connect to the DCC-EX server, set the locomotive address, grab the throttle, and go. All aboard! Step 3. Using access point mode after station mode. If the command station doesn't find our home Wi-Fi network, it will go into the default access point mode, and we can connect to it directly by changing our phone's Wi-Fi setting to the DCC-EX network we saw in the last video. However, even though the command station didn't find our home Wi-Fi network and will boot in access point mode, the Wi-Fi chip will remember our home Wi-Fi network password. This means that the first time we connect to DCC-EX this way, our phone or tablet will give us an error message that the password is incorrect because it is still trying to connect with the old access point password. So this time, instead of using the default PASS_access point password we used before, we will use our home Wi-Fi network's station mode password. So we need to enter our regular home Wi-Fi password even though we are not connecting to our home Wi-Fi network. After this, our phone or tablet will connect to the command station in access point mode. Back in the Y-Throttle app, we need to change our server configuration back to the access point IP address of 192.168.4.1 that we used before. Then we're ready to run trains again. Step 4. Restoring access point mode. I encourage you to try both access point mode and station mode on your DCC-EX command station's Wi-Fi system and decide which is more convenient and reliable for your circumstances. However, as I mentioned before, once we switch to station mode, DCC-EX will continue to connect to our home Wi-Fi network as long as it is within range and the name and password still match. Even if the command station can't connect to our home network, it will enter access point mode with our home network's Wi-Fi password. This remains true even if we delete the configuration file we created for our network name and password. The reason for this is that the Espressif Wi-Fi chip itself retains that information in its memory and will always try to enter station mode as long as it has that information stored. Deleting the configuration file from DCC-EX does not erase the Wi-Fi station mode information stored in the Espressif Wi-Fi chip. So to truly reset the command station to access point mode, we need to erase the information stored in the Wi-Fi chip. We do this by sending the +restore command to the command station. Here's how. First, we need to go back into the Arduino IDE and tell DCC-EX to set the Wi-Fi name and password back to their default values. There are a couple of ways we can do this. The simplest is just to delete the config.h file that we created earlier using the 3 dots menu. Another option is to type the default Wi-Fi name and password into our config.h file in place of the ones we entered for our home Wi-Fi network. In order for this to work, they have to appear exactly as they do in the example configuration file. Specifically, the Wi-Fi SSID has to be exactly your network name with a capital Y in quotes, and the Wi-Fi password has to be exactly your network password with a capital Y, also in quotes, with the word password shortened to PASSWD. Once we've either deleted our config.h file or change the Wi-Fi name and password back to their default settings, we need to upload the sketch to the Arduino. However, this will not clear the memory in the Espressif Wi-Fi chip, and when the command station reboots, it will once again connect to our home Wi-Fi network. So we'll quit the IDE now and open the EX Web Throttle app in Google Chrome. Make sure the debug console is on and connect to our DCC-EX command station by selecting the USB port it is connected to. Then wait a moment for the command station to boot up until we see the message in the debug console that the command station is ready, along with the status of the track power. Now we type the following command into the command line of the debug console, all in capital letters, plus RESTORE. Then we press return or enter or hit the send button. We will see a response in the debug console window. We'll hit the Disconnect DCC++EX button to disconnect from the command station. Unplug the USB cable from the command station, wait a few moments, and then plug it back in. Still in the EX Web Throttle app, we'll reconnect to the command station and watch it boot. This time, if we look closely, we'll see that it is booted into access point mode. We can confirm that the Wi-Fi chip has reverted to the default AP mode PASS_password by typing on the command line +CWSAP ? Press return or enter or hit the send button. We should see the default password in the display. Our command station is now back in access point mode with the default name, password, and IP address. Step 5. Which should you choose, access point or station mode? So why would we choose either access point or station mode over the other? There are a few different possibilities. Access point mode is a very simple connection that doesn't require any additional configuration in DCC-EX. I have also sometimes found that DCC-EX is more responsive to my throttle in access point mode. Also, we can take our DCC-EX command station anywhere and we will always connect to it in the same way. We don't need to connect to our home Wi-Fi network or even need a home Wi-Fi network. If our layout is not close to our home Wi-Fi network router, or if the connection to our home Wi-Fi is poor in our train room, we may get a better connection skipping our home network and connecting in access point mode. Finally, we can let others access our command station in access point mode without giving them our home Wi-Fi password. And if we have spare old phones or tablets, we can set them up as dedicated throttles that connect to the DCC-EX command station without going through our home Wi-Fi network. However, there are also a few limits or drawbacks to access point mode. For one, the Espressif chip on the Wi-Fi shield doesn't have as much power as our home Wi-Fi router does, so if we get more than about 25 or 30 feet away from it, we may not have a reliable connection. Another limitation is that the Espressif chip only supports 4 simultaneous throttles in AP mode, so if we want to have an operating session with more than 4 people, we won't be able to do it with one DCC-EX command station in access point mode. Finally, there is the inconvenience of having to switch our phone or tablet's Wi-Fi setting to DCC-EX every time we want to use it. And remember, when our phone or tablet is connected to the DCC-EX command station in access point mode, we won't have a Wi-Fi internet connection on that device. The limitations of access point mode are the benefits of station mode. Usually, we can locate our command station or our home network router in such a way that DCC-EX has a good connection to our home Wi-Fi network, so we will have a more reliable connection in station mode. Also, our phone or tablet will always be able to find the command station as long as we are on our home Wi-Fi network. We don't need to manually connect to the DCC-EX Wi-Fi chip each time we want to use it, and our device will still have Wi-Fi internet connection even when we are using our throttle app and running trains. Finally, we can use more than 4 throttles simultaneously. However, station mode also has some drawbacks. One of the drawbacks of station mode is that we have to configure DCC-EX with our Wi-Fi network and password in order to use it. For most people, they will do this once and then never have to worry about it again. However, if you frequently take your DCC-EX command station to different locations with different Wi-Fi networks, you'll have to reconfigure it each time with a new Wi-Fi name and password using the Arduino IDE. Otherwise, the command station will default back to access point mode. This also means you will have to keep track of whatever the password is currently set to, because you will also need to use that password to access the command station in access point mode until you reconfigure it again. If you only ever use your DCC-EX command station with your home Wi-Fi network, this won't be a problem. However, you will have to share your Wi-Fi network password with anyone else you want to be able to connect to the command station using their own phone or tablet. So which should you choose, access point or station mode? The choice is up to you. You can even choose both, because now you know how to switch between both modes, and you even know how to restore the command station to its default settings if you choose. Step 6. Our first automation. One of the limitations we currently have is that the free Y-Throttle Lite app does not have a power switch we can use to turn our track power on and off. We can upgrade to the full version of the app, which I recommend you do at some point. But for now, we can get DCC-EX to automatically turn the track power on when the command station starts up. To do this, we'll create an automation in the Arduino IDE and upload it to the command station. So let's open DCC-EX again in the Arduino IDE. What we are going to do next is create an automation file. First, let's look at the example that DCC-EX provided for us. Let's go back to the button with the 3 dots in the tab bar near the upper right corner of the code window. Let's press this button to open its menu with all the DCC-EX components. Scroll down to near the bottom of the list and find the file called myautomation.example.h. This will open the example automation file in the code window. Take a moment to read some of the notes at the top of the list. Now we'll scroll down and find the startup sequence in the code. DCC-EX automation files consist of a collection of sequences, and every automation file needs to have a startup sequence, or DCC-EX will ignore it. The startup sequence always begins with the command autostart and ends with the command done. In this example, the startup sequence turns on the track power and starts up 2 locomotives. There are some additional sequences after that, and you can read what they do in the comments in the code if you like, but we are not interested in those for this exercise. We are interested in turning on the track power. Now that we have looked at this example, let's create our own automation file. Press the button with the 3 dots again, and this time select the New Tab command at the top of the menu. This will ask us what we want to call our new file. In order for our automation to work, we need to name our file myautomation.h with a capital A, exactly like this. So we type that in the box and click OK. This will open up a blank new file for us to type our code in. If we start a line of code with 2 backslashes, the IDE will ignore it when it compiles the code, so we can leave comments. We are now going to create a startup sequence in the automation file to turn on the track power. This will be very simple. Turn on your caps lock because everything we type will be in capital letters. First, we type autostart to begin the startup sequence. Next, we could type power on, as we saw in the example we just looked at, but this will only turn on power for the main track and will not turn on power to the programming track. This normally wouldn't matter because we can't use the programming track with the Y-throttle app anyway. But I like to park a car with a light on the programming track as a handy way to indicate that the track power is on. So we are going to take advantage of a handy feature that DCC-EX has that allows us to join the main and programming tracks together. This allows us to have a section of track on our layout that we can use both as a programming track and still have be part of the main track, so that we don't have to pick up our locomotives and move them to another track in order to program them. So the next command we will type in our startup sequence is join. This command will turn on power to both the main and programming tracks and join them together as if they were one main track. However, we may not actually want our main and programming tracks joined together right away, so we can also unjoin them. So let's type the next command in our startup sequence, unjoin. This will unjoin the main and programming tracks, but importantly, will leave the power for both turned on. So to recap, our startup sequence will turn on power to both the main and programming tracks, briefly join them together, and then unjoin them, leaving us with both a main track and programming track with power on. Finally, to complete our startup sequence, we type the command done. That's all there is to creating a simple automation with a startup sequence. Now we can upload our new code to the Arduino by clicking on the round button with an arrow in it in the upper left-hand corner of the IDE window. The IDE will find our automation file and include it when it compiles the DCC-EX code. When the command station reboots, we can see in the output window that our automation commands were executed and the power is on. Note that the track power is on, even though the power slider in the EX Web Throttle app might not say so. But now we don't need to use the EX Web Throttle app to turn on the track power, and we can control our trains with our Y-throttle app and use our DCC-EX command station even if it is not connected to a computer. Lastly, before I go, I'll share a preview of some of the things you can do with the full version of the iOS Y-throttle app. It adds a few useful features, including a track power slider so you can turn power to the main track on and off from within the app. There is also a dual throttle mode so you can run two trains at once from the same throttle. The full version also includes controls for turnouts and routes, which are really just switches. Using DCC-EX's automation commands, we can set up these switches to do a number of different things besides controlling turnouts. I have some set up to join and unjoin the main and programming tracks, as I described earlier. You could also set up switches to control DCC lighting and other features on your layout. I'll show you how to do some of these things more in depth in a future video. Part 5. Adding an LCD display to DCC-EX. Now that we've added and configured a Wi-Fi shield to our DCC-EX command station and learned how to use the Y-throttle app to control our trains, let's add a digital LCD display to the command station. This is an extremely useful feature that lets us see the status of the command station at a glance. We'll also learn how to configure DCC-EX to add a few custom features to the display. Here are the items on today's waybill. First, we'll purchase a compatible LCD display for our Arduino Mega microcontroller. We'll also make sure we have some suitable jumper wires. Then we'll wire up and connect the LCD display to our DCC-EX command station. After that, we'll update the DCC-EX software in the Arduino IDE to make sure it is properly configured for the LCD display we're using, and learn how to customize the information shown in the display. Finally, we'll put together a simple case for our DCC-EX command station and run some trains. Adding a digital LCD display to DCC-EX. Step 1. Purchase an LCD display and jumper wires if needed. Now that we're ready to add an LCD display to our DCC-EX command station, we need to order the necessary parts. There are just 2 items we'll need to get started: the LCD display and some jumper wires. And we probably already have the wires. I'll include links for both of these items in this video's description. LCD displays come in a variety of sizes, and there are 2 sizes that DCC-EX is compatible with: a 2-line by 16-character display and a 4-line by 20-character display. We will use the 4-line by 20-character display for our command station. LCD displays also come with various types of serial interfaces, or sometimes with no interface at all. We want a display with an I2C serial interface or adapter, which is sometimes referred to as a backpack. We will need an LCD with an I2C backpack in order for our DCC-EX command station to communicate with the display. I2C, which is also written as IIC, stands for Inter-Integrated Circuit and is a 2-wire communication protocol that electronic devices can use to communicate with each other. This is also known as Two-Wired Interface, or TWI. We will often see the same LCD display advertised as being compatible with I2C, IIC, and TWI, and they all mean the same thing. We can readily find these on Amazon. I've had good luck with this GeekPi brand display I purchased in early 2023 for $11. Or if you like, you can buy 2 for $17. And yes, DCC-EX can support more than 1 display at a time, with different text on each. But that is a topic for another video. Just make sure you purchase the 20x4 version, not the 16x2, unless for some reason you only want a 2-line display. And again, make sure you buy a display with the I2C interface or backpack already attached. You can easily see the I2C adapter mounted on the back of the display. Again, I'll include a link for the display in this video's description. There is one other item to point out while we are on the subject. On one end of the interface adapter, there is a set of jumper pins. In some photos, we can see a jumper installed on these pins, while in others it is absent. These jumper pins send power to the display's backlight. When you receive your display, you will want to make sure that the jumper is installed, or else the display won't light up. I have read some reviews online of other brands that did not include the jumpers, or that instead soldered the jumper pins together. Again, I had no problems with the GeekPi brand display. The other item we will need is a package of female-to-female breadboard jumper wires. You should already have these if you purchased the ribbon cable variety pack I recommended for the Wi-Fi installation. If not, get some now. The 20cm length is a convenient size, although if you plan to locate your display somewhere away from the command station, you might decide to go with longer ones. However, the I2C protocol is only intended to cover short distances, so no guarantees how well the really long ones will work. I'll also include some links for the wires in this video's description. We now have all the items we'll need. Step 2. Connect the LCD display to the Arduino. It's now time to connect the LCD display to the Arduino Mega microcontroller at the heart of our DCC-EX command station. This is very simple to do, as long as we pay attention to the labels on the pins. First, let's make sure we unplug all the power to the command station, including the USB cable and the track power. Now, let's peel off a set of 4 female-to-female jumper wires from our ribbon cable. What we are going to do is use the wires to connect the 4 pins on the LCD display's I2C backpack adapter to the I2C channel on the Arduino. The easiest way to do this is to connect the wires to the matching I2C pins on the motor shield, which will then pass the signals through to the Arduino microcontroller. Take a look at the 4 pins on the LCD display's adapter. The GND or ground and VCC or voltage pins are for power to the LCD display, while the SDA and SCL pins are the serial data and clock pins for the I2C communications channel. Now take a look at the top of the motor shield, just next to the edge of the Wi-Fi shield, and you will see the same 4 pins. The only difference is that on the motor shield, the voltage pin is labeled plus 5V instead of VCC. We are going to use our 4 jumper wires to connect each pin on the LCD display to the identical pin on the motor shield. So we will connect the GND pin on the LCD to the GND pin on the motor shield, the VCC pin on the LCD to the plus 5V pin on the motor shield, the SDA pin on the LCD to the SDA pin on the motor shield, and the SCL pin on the LCD to the SCL pin on the motor shield. Carefully slide one end of the wire's female connectors over the pins on the LCD display and the other end over the pins on the motor shield. Here I started with the LCD first, but you may find it easier to do the motor shield first. Check the wire colors to make sure that you have connected the identical pins together. So for example, in this case, I have the blue wire on the ground pins, the green wire on the voltage pins, the yellow wire on the SDA data pins, and the orange wire on the SCL clock pins. Gently press the wire connectors all the way onto the pins and make sure they are firmly seated. And check one more time to make sure that each wire is attached to the same type of pin at each end. Go ahead and plug the USB cable back into the Arduino and let it boot. The display should light up, but you will only see a blank screen with 2 rows of boxes. We have now assembled the hardware for our LCD display. Next, let's configure DCC-EX to let it know what we have done. Step 3. Configure DCC-EX for the LCD display. Now that we have connected an LCD display to our command station, let's configure the DCC-EX code to make it work. By default, DCC-EX comes configured for a 2-line, 16-character display. We need to let it know that we have a 4-line, 20-character display. So let's open the DCC-EX sketch in the Arduino IDE, as we have done in prior videos. Using the button with the 3 dots in the tab bar at the top right corner of the window, let's open the tab with our config.h file that we copied and edited with our Wi-Fi network password in the last video. Remember, it will be down near the bottom of the menu. Now, starting from the top of the config.h file, let's scroll down past the Wi-Fi information we added in the last video and find the line that says Define LCD screen usage by the base station. In this section, we need to find the line that says #define LCD driver 0x27,16,2. You will notice that this line starts with 2 forward slashes, which means that the IDE will treat it as a comment and ignore the line when it compiles the code. So we need to start by deleting the 2 slashes. Once we do this, we should see the text change color to green and orange, just like all the other definitions in the code. Now, as I mentioned before, DCC-EX comes configured for a 2-line, 16-character display, so we need to change the code to let the command station know we have a 4-line, 20-character display. On that line that we just uncommented, we need to change the 16 to a 20 and the 2 to a 4. If we add 2 forward slashes at the end of the line, we can add a short note about what we've done. Once we've done that, we can upload the code to the Arduino using the small round upload button, just like we've done before. That's all there is to it. The command station will reboot, and we should see some basic information about DCC-EX, including its version number, power status, and free memory in the display. After a moment, a second screen will appear with the DCC-EX Wi-Fi server IP address and port number. Before we go on, let's take a moment to adjust the contrast on the LCD panel. On the backpack adapter on the back side of the display, we will find a small blue box with a screw dial in the middle of it, which is a potentiometer that we can use to adjust the contrast of the display. Use a screwdriver to adjust this based on your lighting conditions and viewing angle. You may have to experiment with it a few times to get it just right. Just a reminder that sometimes we may need to cycle the power after we update the command station in order for the Wi-Fi shield to reconnect to our network. So if you see a message in the display from DCC-EX that there is no Wi-Fi, unplug the USB cable, wait a few moments, and then plug it back in again and wait for the command station to reboot. Step 4. Customize DCC-EX for the LCD display. Now let's look at a few different ways to customize the information displayed on the LCD. Let's start by modifying the main sketch for the command station, which is called CommandStation-EX.INO. This should be at the very top of the list in the 3 dots menu. Let's scroll down in the CommandStation-EX.INO sketch and find the line that says Display Start in orange letters. You will see that the first line in this section of code is a comment that tells us that DCC-EX tries to send information to the LCD display even if we don't have an LCD display connected to our command station. Remember before when we saw information about the LCD display show up in the debug console? This is why, and it is intentional. Now let's look at the 2 lines of code that display information on the LCD. DCC-EX can store up to 8 lines of information to display on the LCD, 4 lines at a time, and these 8 lines are numbered from 0 to 7. So the first line of code that we see here will display the DCC-EX version number on the first line in the display, which is LCD line 0. The next line of code will display the version of the open source GPL, or General Public License, that DCC-EX is distributed under on LCD line 1, which is actually the second line in the display. This license grants us legal permission to use the DCC-EX software. Let's bump these down a line and add our own message at the top of the screen. We'll place our mouse cursor at the beginning of the line that starts with LCD parentheses 0 and hit return or enter to add a line. Then we'll type LCD parentheses 0, comma, capital F, parentheses, double quotes, your message here, end quotes, close parentheses, semicolon. You can replace the your message here with your own text. Just remember that it can only be 20 characters max. For reference, your message here is 17 characters. So what does this all mean? LCD is the DCC-EX function that sends information to the LCD display. The parentheses serve as the container for our function. The 0 means we are going to display this information in LCD line 0, which is the first top line in the display. The comma separates the number of the line we want to display the information on, 0 in this case, from the information we actually want to display, which is what comes after the comma. The F, along with the second set of parentheses, is another function we need to convert the text we want to display into the numerical data that we will actually send to the LCD. And we need to include our message in quotes to let DCC-EX know that we want to display the text exactly as written. Finally, we need to end our line of code with a semicolon to indicate that we are done. Now that we have added our own message to appear in the first line at the top of the LCD display, LCD line 0, let's bump the DCC-EX and GPL version numbers down 1 line each. We'll just change the 0 to a 1 for the LCD function to display the DCC-EX version, and the 1 to a 2 for the LCD function for the GPL license number. While we're at it, let's document what we've done by adding some comments at the end of each line by by using 2 forward slashes after the semicolon and leaving ourselves a note. Finally, let's add one more line of text to the display to let us know that the base station is booting when we power it on. Place the cursor at the end of the line with the GPL version and hit return. Now we'll type the following: LCD parentheses 3, capital F parentheses, double quotes, base station booting, end quotes, close parentheses, semicolon. Now let's upload the code to the Arduino using the round upload button, just like before. This will provide us with a visual confirmation whenever the DCC-EX command station starts up. Moreover, once DCC-EX has finished booting, it will overwrite this line of text on the display with the amount of free memory, letting us know that we are ready to run our trains. All aboard! In a later video, I will show you some other ways to customize the text on the LCD display, such as by displaying the ID number and speed of your locomotives, or by displaying messages when you run a DCC-EX automation. Step 5. A case for our DCC-EX command station. We have now assembled all the parts for our DCC-EX command station, including the Arduino, motor shield, Wi-Fi shield, and an LCD display. We may still need to do some other work on the hardware later, such as downgrading the firmware on our Wi-Fi chip, connecting a DCC-EX fast clock to the command station, or wiring up turnouts and signals. But let's take a moment to think about a case for our command station. There are a few different options for mounting the DCC-EX command station, either with or without a case. Unfortunately, there really aren't any pre-manufactured cases available for sale specifically designed for the DCC-EX command station with its motor shield, Wi-Fi shield, and 4-line LCD display. There are some DCC-EX case designs available for 3D printers, so if you have a 3D printer, that could be an option you might consider. Another option is to find a suitably sized project box and modify it to suit by cutting out holes for the wiring and display. You could also mount the command station and LCD display on a board, or you could mount the command station somewhere under your layout with the LCD display mounted separately and not use a case at all. For myself, I found these plastic receptacle boxes with clear lids from my local home improvement store were just what I needed. They come in 2 sizes, standard and deep, which has a taller lid. I went with the standard size. It's a snug fit, but I made it work. You might want to modify it by cutting out some holes and trimming the plastic to accommodate the wiring and USB plug. Also make sure to use an insulating material so that none of the exposed components on the bottom of the LCD display come into contact with the other parts of the command station. We have now assembled a complete DCC-EX command station and are ready to run some trains. Step 6. Run some trains. Let's go run some trains. If you have been using the free version of the Y-Throttle app, you might consider upgrading to the full version. In addition to the features I described in the last video, such as offering a dual throttle and the ability to run DCC-EX automation sequences, the full version also adds the ability to consist your locomotives. Part 6. Correcting DCC-EX Wi-Fi firmware. Now that we've added and configured a Wi-Fi shield on our DCC-EX command station and learned how to use the Y-Throttle app to control our trains, let's circle back and make sure that the Wi-Fi chip firmware is the correct version for DCC-EX. As I mentioned in a prior video, DCC-EX is currently, in 2023, only fully compatible with Wi-Fi shields running an older version of the Wi-Fi chip firmware from 2020. Unfortunately, this older firmware is no longer being used on new Wi-Fi shields in 2023. However, it is possible to upgrade or downgrade the firmware on the Wi-Fi chip to the compatible version from 2020. While not hard, this is a bit of a detailed task, and we don't want any derailments, so we'll need to pay attention to the signals. Also, the specific steps we'll take will depend on whether we're using a Mac or Windows PC to reprogram the Wi-Fi chip. Here are the stops along today's route. First, we'll check the current version of our Wi-Fi chip firmware to see if we need to upgrade or downgrade to the DCC-EX compatible version. Then we'll purchase the necessary parts to reprogram the Wi-Fi chip. After that, we'll prepare the Wi-Fi shield and serial adapter with some jumper wires to get them ready for the new firmware programming. Next, we'll look at how Mac users install the necessary software on their computers and reprogram the Wi-Fi chip firmware. Then we'll look at the different process that Windows users follow. Finally, we'll reassemble the command station and run some trains. Correcting the Wi-Fi firmware for DCC-EX. Step 1. Check the Wi-Fi firmware to see if it is the correct version. Before we go on, let's check the firmware of the Espressif Wi-Fi chip we already have on our Wi-Fi shield to see if it is the correct version for DCC-EX. We'll do this using the EX Web Throttle app in Google Chrome. Make sure that your command station is connected to your computer using the USB cable. Then open the EX Web Throttle app in Google Chrome and connect to DCC-EX the same way we have in the past. Make sure that the debug console is on, clear the log, and then type the following on the command line: plus JMR, all in capital letters. Then press the send button or hit return or enter. Now scroll up through the output in the console log and find the line that says AT version, followed by a 4-part number. The version that's currently being included on the MakerFab's Wi-Fi shield in 2023 is version 2.2 from February 9th, 2021. The version we want for DCC-EX is version 1.7.4 from May 11th, 2020. If you already have version 1.7.4 on your Wi-Fi shield, then you're all set. You can skip the rest of this video. Highball it out of here and go run some trains. However, if you have version 2.2 or an older version from prior to 2020, you will want to upgrade or downgrade the Wi-Fi firmware to 1.7.4 for better performance. Here's how. Step 2. Purchase the necessary serial adapter and jumper wires if needed. Before we can upgrade or downgrade the Wi-Fi firmware to the correct version for DCC-EX, we need to obtain the necessary parts. The main item that we will need is a serial adapter, which we can get on Amazon. If you saw my video about adding an LCD display to your command station, you may remember that we talked about the display having an I2C backpack adapter. We need something similar here, except that we will not be physically mounting the adapter to anything the way that the I2C backpack was mounted to the LCD display. Also, instead of using the I2C protocol, we are going to use something called the UART protocol, which stands for Universal Asynchronous Receiver Transmitter. Finally, the last piece of information we need to know is that we will be plugging our UART serial adapter into one of the USB ports on our computer, which will need to communicate with the adapter using something called a CP2102 USB to UART bridge, made by a company called Silicon Labs. We'll come back to this later when Windows PC users install the software drivers. But for now, let's just look on Amazon for a CP2102 UART serial adapter. These come in various configurations and packages, but we'll just stick with something simple, like this 5-pin adapter. You can see several companies selling essentially identical items. I purchased a 2-pack of this Izoki brand for $10, figuring that I would have a spare if needed. I'll include links to a few different brands of the serial adapter in this video's description. You can also find the links to the serial adapter and all the other items you will need in a recent post on my community page. The other item we will need is some jumper wires. We will want 2 female-to-female wires, 2 male-to-female wires, and 1 male-to-male wire. If you purchased a variety of jumper wires when we installed the Wi-Fi shield, you should already have these. Optionally, some of the serial adapters come with a set of 4 female-to-female jumpers, which we can use in place of the 2 male-to-female jumpers, but we will still need 1 male-to-male jumper wire. I'll also include links to a couple of brands of jumper wires in this video's description. There is also one optional item that you might consider getting, although it is not required. When the time comes to finally install the new firmware on the Wi-Fi chip, we will need to insert the USB adapter into our computer with one hand while carefully holding one of the male jumper wire pins in place on the correct spot on the Wi-Fi shield with the other hand. This can be a bit tricky to do without dislodging the jumper wire from its spot. It's also difficult to do if your computer is not a laptop, since the USB ports may be somewhere under your desk. To make things a bit easier, you might consider spending a little extra to purchase a USB extension cable with an inline power switch. That way you can get everything plugged in ahead of time and just flip the switch when you're ready. I purchased this version with a 6-foot cable and switch for $12.50, but shorter versions are available for $7. It's important to make sure that you get one that supports data transmission and not just power. I'll include links to these in this video's description. Finally, because the serial adapter we are using has the original USB-A style plug on it, you will need a computer with a traditional USB-A port. Since I haven't mentioned this in any of my previous videos, I assume that if you have been using DCC-EX with a Mac laptop or other computer with only USB-C ports, you have a suitable dock or USB adapter that allows you to use USB-A devices. However, if you think you are going to want to install the Wi-Fi firmware using a Mac laptop or other computer with only USB-C ports, you will want to be aware of this issue and get a suitable dock or USB-A to USB-C adapter. Those are all the items we'll need. Step 3. Prepare the hardware. We will now look at how to prepare the Wi-Fi shield for the new firmware installation. You won't need the Wi-Fi shield until the final part of the software installation, so you can hold off on preparing it until then if you like. However, the software installation is different for Mac and Windows users, so we'll cover them separately. The hardware preparation is the same for everyone, so we'll cover that now. First, we need to unplug our command station and disconnect all the power. We then need to unplug the jumper wires from the Wi-Fi shield. You can leave them connected to the Arduino. Remember which wire goes on which pin. We are going to be connecting other wires to these pins when we install the new firmware, and we will also need to reconnect the jumpers from the Arduino later when we reassemble the command station. Then carefully remove the Wi-Fi shield from the Arduino Mega microcontroller. We are going to be handling the Wi-Fi shield quite a bit, so be careful not to bend its pins. I put mine back in the foam packing material it was originally shipped in. Now we are going to connect the serial adapter we purchased to the Wi-Fi shield using 4 jumper wires. The easiest solution is to use 2 male-to-female wires and 2 female-to-female wires. However, if you only have the female-to-female wires that came with the serial adapter, you can use those. Take a look at the serial adapter we purchased. On one end is a USB plug, and on the other end are 5 wire pins. We are going to connect our jumper wires to 4 of these pins: the plus 5 volt and ground pins, and the transmit and receive pins. We will not be using the 3.3 volt pin. Let's start with power and ground pins. If you have them, use 2 male to female jumper wires. Otherwise, use 2 female to female wires. Slide the female end of one wire over the plus 5V pin on the serial adapter and the female end of the other wire over the GND pin. Now take a look at the Wi-Fi shield. If we orient the Wi-Fi shield so that the lettering is right side up, then along the bottom edge of the Wi-Fi shield are 2 header sockets with 6 pins each. We can tell that these are different from the sockets on the top edge of the board, which have 8 pins each. If we look at the labels for the pins in the socket on the bottom left, we will see that from left to right they are reset RST, 3.3 volts, 5 volts, ground, and voltage in, VIN. It's not entirely obvious, but the GND ground label actually covers both the 4th and 5th pins because there are 2 ground pins in this socket. We are going to use the 5V pin and the GND pin that is right next to it. So let's take the male end of the jumper wire that we connected to the plus 5V pin on the serial adapter and insert it into the 5V spot in the socket, which again is the 3rd spot from the left in this orientation. Then we'll take the male end of the jumper wire that we connected to the GND pin on the serial adapter and insert it into the GND socket that is right next to the 5V spot in the 4th spot from the left. When we are done, there should be 2 empty spots for wires on each side of the 2 wires that we just installed. Now, if for some reason you do not have male to female jumper wires, you can use the female to female wires, but you will connect them to the header pins on the underside of the motor shield rather than to the header sockets on the top. So you'll connect the plus 5V wire to the 3rd pin from the left and the GND wire to the 4th pin just next to it. Again, there should be 2 empty pins on each side of the wires you just installed. Now we'll do the transmit and receive pins. Take 2 female to female jumper wires and slide the end of one wire over the RXD receive pin on the serial adapter and one end of the other wire over the TXD transmit pin. Now, similar to what we did when we added the Wi-Fi shield to our command station, we need to connect the wire from the receive pin on the serial adapter to one of the transmit pins on the Wi-Fi shield, and the wire from the transmit pin on the serial adapter to one of the receive pins on the Wi-Fi shield. When we are done, we should have a wire going from the plus 5V pin on the serial adapter to the 5V socket on the Wi-Fi shield, a wire going from the GND pin on the serial adapter to the GND socket just next to the 5V socket, another wire going from the RXD pin on the serial adapter to one of the TX pins on the Wi-Fi shield, which are on the row of pins closest to the outer edge of the board, and a wire going from the TXD pin on the serial adapter to one of the RX pins on the Wi-Fi shield, which are on the row of pins closest to the middle of the board. Check one more time to make sure that you have all the wires configured correctly. The last thing that we need to do is get one male-to-male jumper wire and insert the pin from one end of the wire into the other GND ground socket on the Wi-Fi shield, just next to the ground wire from the serial adapter that we already installed. This will be the 5th spot from the left out of the 6 spots on the header socket, so there will be one empty spot next to this wire when we are done. We will not do anything with the other end of the male-to-male jumper wire until we are ready to install the new firmware. The reason for this is that the Espressif Wi-Fi chip is locked to prevent the firmware from being modified without a key. In this case, the key is our male-to-male jumper wire, and the keyhole is one of the otherwise anonymous pins on the Wi-Fi shield called GPIO0. Let's take a moment to understand this and find that pin. According to Espressif, when GPIO0 is pulled high, the Wi-Fi chip operates in its normal mode. However, when GPIO 0 is connected to ground at startup, the Wi-Fi chip will enter the ROM bootloader programming mode for the ESP tool. This is the mode we need to be in to install the new firmware. GPIO 0 is normally pulled high, meaning that it has a voltage applied to it, unless it is explicitly connected to ground. If we look at the schematic for the MakerFab's Wi-Fi shield, we can see that GPIO 0 is directly connected through a 10K resistor to 3.3 volts. What this means for us is that in order to take GPIO 0 to ground, we are going to have to apply a ground directly to the pin on the Wi-Fi chip instead of at a more convenient spot on the Wi-Fi shield. If we look again at the schematic, we can see that the GPIO 0 pin is the fourth pin from the bottom of the chip on the right-hand side. If we now look at the Wi-Fi shield itself and count up 4 pins from the bottom, we will see the GPIO 0 pin is just next to the letter P in the ESP-12F label printed on the chip package. In this angle, the bottom of the chip is on the left, so the GPIO 0 pin is the fourth pin from the left. This is where we will need to apply ground using the pin of our male jumper wire. We'll do this just before we plug the serial adapter into the computer and send the command to update the firmware. But we're not ready for that just yet. Our hardware is prepared. Now on to the software. As I mentioned before, the process is different for Mac and Windows PC users. Mac users will use Espressif's ESP tool, which is written in the Python programming language. Actually, anyone using a Mac, Windows, or even Linux computer can use the Python ESP tool if they have Python installed. However, Windows users will typically use a different Flash download tool. We'll cover the process for Mac users first. Step 4. Mac users install the download tool software and Wi-Fi chip firmware. We will now go through the series of steps that Mac users will follow to download and install the necessary software on their computers and then download the new firmware to the Wi-Fi shield. We'll call these parts A, B, and C. Anyone who wants to use the Python script to install the firmware can follow along. We will cover Windows in the next section. While not difficult, this is a somewhat technical process and may vary depending on how your computer is configured, what version of Mac OS you are using, and how your user profile is set up. You can perform the steps of parts A and B before you prepare the hardware to make sure it all runs smoothly when the conductor's whistle blows. Part A. Download the firmware. The first thing we are going to do is download the compatible version of the Wi-Fi chip firmware from the DCC-EX website. We can find this by selecting the Downloads link from the menu on the left-hand side of the DCC-EX homepage and then clicking on the link for the ESP8266 Wi-Fi boards. We will then click on the button for the ESP8266 firmware. This will download the DCC-EX compatible 1.7.4 version of the Wi-Fi firmware to our Downloads folder. I'll include links to the download page and the firmware in this video's description. Mac users do not need to download the Flash download tool. Now we'll go to our Downloads folder and double-click on the ESP8266 zip file we just downloaded to extract the contents of the zip file. When we look inside the extracted folder, we will see a folder called Bin. Inside the bin folder are the so-called binary files that contain the compiled code that we will download to the Wi-Fi chip. We'll keep the ESP8266 folder open so we can see the bin folder inside, and we'll come back to it shortly. But let's move on to the next part of the process. Part B. Set up Python and the ESP tool in the Mac terminal. We will do the rest of our firmware installation using the Mac terminal. Terminal is the Unix-style command line interface that the Mac inherited in OS X 10.0 after Steve Jobs returned to Apple in the late 90s. Even though it has been a part of the Mac for over 20 years, most Mac users have probably never used it or even know that it exists. The terminal app is located in the Utilities folder inside the Applications folder. Once we launch the terminal, we will have a command line interface to the computer. The first thing we need to do in Terminal is install version 3 of the Python programming language, because the tool that we will use to download the firmware to the Espressif Wi-Fi chip is written in Python. This tool, which is technically classified as a ROM bootloader utility, is called ESP-Tool, and we need Python to use it. Some Macs may already have Python 3 installed, although most will not. To install Python 3, we simply type Python 3 on the terminal command line and press Return or Enter. Unless you have previously used Apple's developer tools, you will receive a message that the developer tools are required and asked if you are ready to install them now. Click the Install button and then agree to the license agreement. This will download the command line developer tools, including Python 3, so that you can use them from Terminal. The download will take several minutes to complete, so go run some trains while you're waiting. Eventually, we will see a message that the software was installed. Click Done. Now, back in Terminal, we'll try the Python 3 command again, except that instead of typing Python 3 on the command line like we did before, we'll use the up arrow on the keyboard to bring up the last command we used, which was Python 3. This time, when we press Return or Enter, we'll receive a message with the Python version number, 3.9.6 in this case. This lets us know that Python is installed and working. Type Quit with a pair of empty parentheses after it and press Return or Enter to exit Python and return to the terminal command line. Now let's install the Python ESP tool that we will use to download the firmware binary files onto the Wi-Fi chip. To do this, we will use the Python package installer, which is called pip. On the terminal command line, we will type the following and press Return or Enter. Python 3 -m pip install ESP tool. I'll include the text for this command in this video's description so that you can copy and paste it if you like. This will now install the Python ESP tool that we will use to download the firmware to the Espressif Wi-Fi chip on our Wi-Fi shield. This will take another minute or so, and we will see lots of information in the window as the Python pip downloads and installs the ESP tool. Finally, we will get a message that various files were successfully installed. We can ignore any warning messages about what version of pip we are using or which directories are not on path. Type Clear and press Return or Enter to clear the screen. We will now verify that the ESP tool is installed and working. On the terminal command line, type the following and press Return or Enter. Python 3 -m ESP tool. This will show us the ESP tool version number and a list of all the various commands and optional instructions that we can use with ESP tool, which allows us to verify that it is properly installed and working. We have now completed the setup of Python and ESP tool and are ready to install the firmware on the Wi-Fi shield as soon as the hardware is prepared. If you haven't already completed that step, do it now before going on. Part C. Install the new firmware on the Wi-Fi chip. Here's a quick version of what's on the track ahead. First, in Terminal, we'll change locations to the directory where we downloaded the firmware binaries. We'll then copy and paste the terminal commands we will use to download the firmware to the Wi-Fi shield so that they are ready when we need them. Then we'll plug the serial adapter into one of the USB ports on our computer and do a practice run by using the ESP tool to see if it can connect to the Wi-Fi chip. Then we'll unplug the serial adapter. Finally, we'll hold the pin from the loose end of the male-to-male jumper wire on the correct spot on the Wi-Fi chip, plug the serial adapter back in again, and run the terminal commands we set up earlier to download the firmware onto the Wi-Fi shield. Let's do this. First, in the terminal window, let's clear the screen like we did before by typing Clear and pressing Return or Enter. Now we need to change the terminal's working location or directory to the bin folder, with the expressive firmware binaries in it that we downloaded and extracted earlier. On the terminal's command line, we will type CD followed by a space, which stands for Change Directory, but we will not press Enter or Return just yet. Instead, we will go back to the Finder and find the bin folder inside the ESP8266 folder we extracted from the zip file in our Downloads folder. We will drag the bin folder into the terminal window and release the mouse button. This will not copy the folder, but instead will tell Terminal where the folder is located. We should see this location spelled out on the command line in Terminal. The location of the bin folder will be in your Downloads folder, so it will look different from what is shown here. Back in Terminal, we will now press Return or Enter. This will change the working directory for our terminal commands to the bin folder. We can confirm that we have successfully changed the directory by typing ls-l on the command line and pressing Return or Enter. This will display a list of the files in the working directory, which is now the bin folder. We will see the names of all the firmware binary files we extracted from the zip file, along with their sizes and the dates they were created. In particular, if we look at the largest file, called user1.2048.new.5.bin, we can see that it was created in May 2020, which corresponds to the version of the Wi-Fi firmware that we need. Now we will enter the long command that we will use later to download the firmware to the Wi-Fi shield. The best way to do this is to copy the command from this video's description and paste it on the terminal command line. This is the command. I won't read it all out. You can copy it from this video's description. This command directs Python to run the ESP tool and tells the ESP tool to download or write all the binary files we just saw in our list to the expressive Wi-Fi chip. All the numbers that start with 0x are the so-called offsets to the memory addresses on the chip where the files will be written. We need to make sure that this command is right, so we'll go to this video's description in YouTube, copy the lines with this command, making sure we get all of it, and then paste it on the command line in Terminal. We can now press Return or Enter. The ESP tool will run, find our computer's serial ports, and attempt to connect to the expressive Wi-Fi chip on each available port. Eventually, it will report back an error that it could not connect to an expressive device. That is because we haven't plugged one in yet. If you instead receive an error from the ESP tool that no such file or directory was found, it is because the working directory was not properly set or no longer set to the bin folder. Use the CD command again to change the directory to the bin folder in the ESP8266 folder we extracted from the file we downloaded, and try again. Now let's plug in the serial adapter and test our connection to the Wi-Fi chip. We'll carefully plug the serial adapter into one of the USB ports on our computer, making sure not to dislodge any of the jumper wires we installed. We should immediately see a red light come on. Now, on the terminal command line, we will type the following and press Return or Enter. Python 3-m ESP tool read_Mac. Again, I'll include this command in this video's description so you can copy and paste it if you like. If we watch the serial adapter carefully, we will see some blue lights flashing, indicating that data is being transmitted and received. Again, we will see some errors, but this time, on one of our serial ports, it will say that the serial data stream was stopped due to possible noise or corruption. This lets us know that ESP tool identified the expressive Wi-Fi chip but could not write the firmware. The reason for this, as I mentioned before, is that the expressive Wi-Fi chip's firmware is locked. It's time to use our key. Unplug the serial adapter from the USB port on your computer. Now, take the pin on the loose end of the male-to-male jumper wire and hold it on the Wi-Fi chip's GPIO0 pin. Remember, this is the fourth pin up from the bottom of the chip on the right-hand side next to the P in ESP. The GPIO pin has a small dimple on it that will help guide the male pin from the wire. Find a comfortable and secure spot so that you can hold the pin in place with one hand while manipulating the serial adapter and your computer with the other. You may even want to ask someone to help. While continuing to hold the male pin from the wire on the GPIO0 pin on the Wi-Fi chip, we will plug the serial adapter back into our computer. This will put the chip into ROM bootloader mode. Continue to keep the wire pin touching the GPIO0 pin. We will now press the up arrow key on our keyboard to recall the ESP tool read_Mac command we previously used. When we press enter or return this time, ESP tool should connect to the Wi-Fi chip and report back its unique hardware address. If for some reason you get the error that ESP tool was unable to connect to the Espressif Wi-Fi chip on any of the available serial ports, unplug the serial adapter from your computer, check all the wiring, and make sure you are holding the pin from the jumper wire on the GPIO0 pin on the Wi-Fi chip, and try again. Continue to keep the wire pin touching the GPIO0 pin and don't remove it. Now that we have confirmed that the ESP tool can communicate with the Wi-Fi chip, we can finally install the new firmware. While continuing to hold the wire pin on the GPIO0 pin, we will press the up arrow key on our keyboard several times to recall the lengthy ESP write_flash command that we copied from the video's description. While keeping the pin in place on the GPIO0 pin, we will press return or enter. ESP tool will confirm that it is about to erase the current firmware from the memory addresses we entered and then begin writing the new firmware. A counter will count the percentage of completion, and when it is done, ESP tool will issue a final report on the amount of data it sent or wrote to the Wi-Fi chip. We can finally remove the pin we have been holding and unplug the serial adapter from our computer. Again, if you get an error message, unplug the serial adapter, check all the wiring, make sure you are holding the pin on the GPIO0 pin, and try again. Mac users have now replaced the firmware on the Wi-Fi chip with the version that is compatible with DCC-EX. Let's look at the process for Windows. Step 5. Windows users install the USB bridge driver, the flash download tool, and Wi-Fi chip firmware. Now that we have looked at the process for Mac users to replace the firmware on the Wi-Fi shield, let's look at the steps that Windows users will follow. We will also divide these steps up into parts A, B, and C. And again, some of these steps may vary slightly, or you may see different messages on the screen when you conduct these steps, depending on how your computer is configured and what version of Windows you are using. You can perform the steps of parts A and B in either order before you move on to part C. You will need the serial adapter on hand in order to perform part B, but otherwise you can perform both steps A and B before you assemble the rest of the hardware so that you are ready to take the main when the signal turns green. Part A. Download the firmware and flash download tool. The first thing we are going to do is download the compatible version of the Wi-Fi chip firmware along with the Espressif flash download tool for Windows from the DCC-EX website. We can find both of these by selecting the Downloads link from the menu on the left-hand side of the DCC-EX homepage and then clicking on the link for the ESP8266 Wi-Fi boards. We will then click on both of the two download buttons, the one for the flash download tool and the one for the ESP8266 firmware. These will download the DCC-EX compatible 1.7.4 version of the Wi-Fi firmware to our Downloads folder, along with the tool that we'll use to install it. I'll include links to the download page, the tool, and the firmware in this video's description. Now let's go to our Downloads folder and extract the contents from both of the zip files that we just downloaded. We can jump directly to our Downloads folder by using one of the links in our browser's Downloads menu, or we can navigate there using Windows. Once in the Downloads folder, we will right-click on each of the two zip files in turn and select Extract All to extract their contents. We can save the resulting files right in the Downloads folder for convenience. You can move them later if you like. After we extract all the files, Let's delete both of the zip files we downloaded to avoid any confusion. We are now ready to move on to the next part of the process. Part B. Install the driver for the serial adapter. Before we can use the serial adapter on our Windows computer, we need to install the driver. In order to do this, we will need to have the serial adapter available to plug it into our computer. You may recall that when we looked at what kind of serial adapter to purchase, we selected one that uses a CP2102 USB to UART bridge made by a company called Silicon Labs. So it should not be a surprise that we will get the necessary driver from the Silicon Labs website. We will use the CP210X Universal Windows driver. I'll include a link to the Silicon Labs driver and download page in this video's description. Once we download the driver, we need to extract it from the zip file, just like we did for the firmware files. And again, we'll delete the zip file afterwards to avoid any confusion. Next, we will use the Windows Device Manager to install the new driver. The easiest way to open the Device Manager is to use the search box on the Windows taskbar at the bottom of the screen, or from the search box in the Start menu. We can also find a link to the Device Manager in the control panel in the Hardware and Sound settings. Once Device Manager is open, we'll plug the serial adapter into one of the USB ports on our computer. After a moment, the Device Manager should refresh, and under the Other Devices entry, we should see a listing for the CP2102 bridge. We'll select this and press the button at the top that looks like a gear with an up arrow that says Add Drivers when we hover over it. We will then navigate to our Downloads folder and find the CP210X Universal Windows Driver folder we extracted from the zip file we downloaded from Silicon Labs. We'll click OK and then Next, and the Device Manager will proceed to install the drivers. After a few moments, we should see a message that the drivers were successfully installed. We now have the firmware files and the flash download tool and have installed the drivers for the serial adapter, which means we are ready to install the firmware on the Wi-Fi shield as soon as the hardware is ready. If you haven't already completed the step for preparing the hardware, do that now before we continue. Part C. Install the new firmware on the Wi-Fi chip. Here is a rundown on the curves waiting just ahead. First, we'll open and configure the flash download tool and select the files we need to download to the Wi-Fi chip, as well as enter the memory addresses on the Wi-Fi chip where the tool will write that data. Then we'll plug the serial adapter into one of the USB ports on our computer and do a practice run by using the flash download tool to see if it can connect to the Wi-Fi chip. Then we'll unplug the serial adapter. Finally, we'll hold the pin from the loose end of the male-to-male jumper wire on the correct spot on the Wi-Fi chip, plug the serial adapter back in, and run the flash download tool one more time to download the firmware onto the Wi-Fi shield. Sound the horn because we're not stopping now. First, let's go back to our Downloads folder and find the Flash Download Tool application. We'll have to open a couple of folders to reach it. We'll double-click on the application to open it. We'll be asked if we want to use Developer Mode or Factory Mode. We'll select Developer Mode. We'll then select the ESP8266 download tool from the different choices. It will probably be at the top of the list. A new window will open up, allowing us to configure and select the files we want to download to the Wi-Fi chip. We'll make sure the SPI Download tab is selected at the top. The SPI speed is 40 MHz, the SPI mode is QIO, and we'll set the flash size to 32 megabits. We'll select the COM port later after we plug in the serial adapter. First, let's select the files we need to download to the Wi-Fi chip. We will be making 5 entries in all. Let's start at the top. Click on the button with the 3 dots on the right-hand side of the top line to open the file selection window. We'll need to navigate to our Downloads folder and then to the ESP8266 firmware folder we extracted earlier. Inside this, we'll select another ESP8266 folder, and finally, inside that, we'll select the bin folder, which contains the binary files we need to download to the Wi-Fi chip. The first file we are going to select is the boot_v1.7 binary. Select that file and click the Open button, and its name and file path will appear on the first line in the Download Tool window, highlighted in green. We now need to specify the hexadecimal memory address offsets for the locations on the Wi-Fi chip where the download tool should write this data. So in the top box on the right-hand side of the window, we will enter the following address: 0x00000. I'll include the memory addresses for all the files in this video's description. Now we'll move on to the second line and press the second button with the 3 dots. This time we'll select the user1 file and press Open. Again, the file name and path will appear in the window, highlighted in green. The memory address for the user1 file is 0x01000. On the third line, we'll select the ESP-init file. Its memory address is 0x1FC000. This address is much higher because the user1 file we uploaded before it contained the bulk of the firmware code. Moving on to the fourth line, we'll select the blank.bin file and set its memory address to 0xFE000. Finally, on the fifth line, we will select the blank file again. This time the address is 0x1FE000. Before moving on, we'll select the checkboxes on the left for these 5 lines to let the tool know to include these files in the firmware download. Now we need to let the tool know which COM port we will plug the serial adapter into. To do this, we need to plug the serial adapter into the USB port we plan to use for the firmware installation. Then we can click on the drop-down COM menu in the tool and select the COM port that appears. USB ports on Windows computers usually have low numbers. In this example, the tool found the serial adapter on COM port 4. We'll also check to make sure that the baud rate is set to 1152,000. That's a typo in the menu, by the way, because 115200 is what the tool will actually use, as that is a common baud rate for USB serial communications in applications like this. But we'll just pretend we didn't notice. Let's check all of our settings one more time to make sure that everything is correct and that all the file names and memory offset addresses are just like those shown here. Now we'll do a practice run by pressing the Start button in the bottom left corner of the tool window. We'll see the tool test the memory offset addresses we entered, then connect to the USB. The tool will then attempt to connect with the Wi-Fi chip, but nothing will happen. After a few seconds of this, we'll click Stop. We'll see a message in a pop-up dialog box that the sync failed, and if we look closely at the output window, we'll see a message that the ESP sync was blocked. The reason for this, as I mentioned before, is that the Espressif Wi-Fi chip firmware is locked. It's time to use our key. Unplug the serial adapter from the USB port on your computer. Now take the pin on the loose end of the male-to-male jumper wire and hold it on the Wi-Fi chip's GPIO0 pin. Remember, this is the 4th pin up from the bottom of the chip on the right-hand side, next to the P in ESP. The GPIO0 pin has a small dimple in it that will help guide the male pin from the wire. Find a comfortable and secure spot so that you can hold the pin in place with one hand while manipulating the serial adapter and your computer with the other. You may even want to ask someone to help. While continuing to hold the male pin from the wire on the GPIO0 pin on the Wi-Fi chip, we will plug the serial adapter back into our computer. This will put the chip into ROM bootloader mode. Continue to keep the wire pin touching the GPIO0 pin. Press the Start button in the bottom left corner of the tool window again. Keep the wire pin touching the GPIO0 pin and don't remove it. If for some reason the tool won't connect or you get a serial port failure, make sure you've selected the correct COM port in the COM drop-down menu. Then unplug the serial adapter and try again. If you get a red status indicator that says Error and see a message in the output window that says chip eFuse check error. This means that the GPIO0 was not properly grounded. Unplug the serial adapter from your computer's USB. Check all the wiring. Make sure that the male jumper wire pin is firmly on the GPIO0 pin. Plug the adapter back in and try again. This time we should see a message that the tool is uploading and running a stub, which is the first part of the firmware updating process. Simultaneously, we'll see a green progress bar make its way across the bottom of the screen. After a few moments, the download will be complete and the green status indicator above the Start button will say Finish. We have completed the firmware download. Step 6. Reassemble the command station. It's now time to reassemble the command station. Take all of the jumper wires off of the Wi-Fi shield. Carefully line up the pins on the bottom of the Wi-Fi shield with the header sockets on the Arduino and gently insert them like we did before. Reattach the jumper wires from the Arduino to the Wi-Fi shield, making sure that the wire from the transmit pin on the Arduino goes to one of the receive pins on the Wi-Fi shield, and the wire from the receive pin on the Arduino goes to one of the transmit pins on the Wi-Fi shield. Plug the USB cable from your computer into the Arduino and let it boot. Open the EX Web Throttle app in Google Chrome and connect to DCC-EX. On the command line, type +G, M, R, and hit return or enter again. This time, the firmware version should be 1.7.4. We have now updated the firmware on the Wi-Fi chip to the version that is compatible with DCC-EX and are ready to run some trains. All aboard! Step 7. Run some trains. This video completes the series on how to assemble a basic DCC-EX command station. Along the way, we've learned how to assemble the Arduino Mega microcontroller and motor shield, connect up wiring for power and tracks, install and configure DCC-EX, add and configure a Wi-Fi shield for both access point and station mode with the correct firmware for DCC-EX, add and customize an LCD display, and assemble a simple case to hold it all together. We even looked at some simple automations. In future videos, we'll look at a few of the other things we can do with DCC-EX, both with additional hardware as well as by modifying the code. One of our first hardware projects will be to assemble a DCC-EX fast clock using an Arduino Uno and a touchscreen display, which will then connect to the command station. On the software side, we'll experiment with some more automations and find ways to show additional information on our new LCD display. Later on, we'll look at adding sensors, signals, and maybe even turnout control. We'll also look at some of the other types of throttles you can use to control your trains, using JMRI and DCC-EX together. Addenda, a case for DCC-EX and automations. Tips from DriverDTrains. Make a case for your DCC-EX command station. Purchase a plastic receptacle box from your local home improvement store. Drill a hole for the USB cable. A stepper drill bit really helps. Place the command station inside. Cut a piece of soft insulating material to fit. This was packing material from a cheap cell phone case. Cut a hole for the jumpers on top and notch the side for the wires to the display. Put it all together and mount it on your layout. Take it to go and you can run your trains anywhere. All aboard! Tips from DriverDTrains. Create an automation to display a message on your LCD. Open DCC-EX in the Arduino IDE. Navigate to the myautomation.h sketch in the 3 dots menu. Add a route to display your message. Give it a number and a name that will appear in your throttle app. Enter up to 8 lines of text on LCD rows 1 through 7. Remember, each line can only have 20 characters max. Upload the new sketch to the Arduino using the round upload button. Open your Y-Throttle or Engine Driver app and select a locomotive. Go to the throttle, navigate to the route screen, and find your new route. Set the route to display your message on the LCD. All aboard! What's next? Bonus materials and JMRI. In my next series of videos, I will introduce you to the basics of JMRI, the Java Model Railroad Interface, and show you how to use JMRI with DCC-EX and the Y-Throttle and Engine Driver apps to program your locomotives and run your trains. This initial series of videos will focus on JMRI's Decoder Pro app and JMRI throttles. I'll come back to the Panel Pro app and turnout control later. However, before we dive into JMRI, I have a few other deliveries to make, including some bonus materials from the DCC-EX series. But that will be for another day. We've still got a long trip ahead of us. Until then, thanks for watching. Well, Scratchy, what do you think? That's right, you are the star of the show. All aboard!